The ocean doesn't just get dark at 36,000 feet. It gets heavy. It's a weight that presses against the hull of the Acheron with the force of 1,000 elephants standing on a postage stamp. At this depth, the water is no longer liquid. It's a hostile, pressurized solid. I sat in the pilot's chair of the salvage rig, watching the external depth gauge flicker. 10,911 meters, 10,912, 10,913. I'm a deep recovery engineer. My job is to go where the machines fail. And the USS Vanguard hadn't just failed. It had vanished. It was a Titan-class nuclear submarine, the crown jewel of the Navy's silent fleet, designed to sit in the Hadal zone and listen to the world. It was supposed to be the most advanced vessel ever built, a city of steel and silicon capable of vanishing for years at a time. 3 days ago, the Vanguard sent a single 3-word burst transmission. Space is full. Then it went dark. Pressure check, I muttered into the comms. My voice felt thick in the high oxygen mix of the cockpit. Hull integrity, 98%. External pressure, 15,750 psi. Descent rate steady. The ship's computer, a low-latency AI named Dredge, replied. I leaned forward, my forehead almost touching the 6-inch thick synthetic sapphire viewport. Outside, there was nothing but the marine snow, the white flakes of organic detritus that fall from the upper world to feed the scavengers of the deep. But down here, the snow was different. It was gray, ash-like, and seemed to be swirling in a current that shouldn't exist at the bottom of a trench. Dredge, sonar ping. Give me a silhouette. The boom of the active sonar rippled through the hull, a sound that bypassed the ears and vibrated in the marrow. A few seconds later, the wireframe display on my console flickered to life. Found you, I whispered. The Vanguard was perched precariously on a jagged shelf of basalt, right on the lip of a secondary fissure that dropped even deeper into the Earth's mantle. It looked like a dead whale, its black hull scarred and pitted by something that didn't look like coral or rock. It looked like bite marks, but nothing at 11,000 meters was big enough to bite a nuclear sub. As I maneuvered the Acheron closer, the first thing I noticed was a lack of debris. When a sub sinks, there's usually a trail, emergency rafts, oil slicks, personal effects. But the Vanguard was clean. It looked like it had been placed there by a giant hand. I brought the salvage rig into position above the Vanguard's primary escape trunk. The magnetic grapples engaged with a bone-jarring clack that echoed through both ships. Dredge, initiate hard seal. Equalize pressure to the sub's internal atmosphere. Warning. Internal pressure of the USS Vanguard is recorded at 1.2 atmospheres. Oxygen content, 19%. CO2 levels, rising. Biometric scan inconclusive. 1.2 atmospheres? That was impossible. If the sub was at that depth and hadn't imploded, the hull integrity should have been perfect. But the sonar showed massive gashes in the outer skin. By all laws of physics, the Vanguard should be a crushed soda can filled with silt. I grabbed my thermal seal diving suit and my heavy-duty plasma cutter. My heart was a frantic drum in my chest. I've salvaged graveyard ships before, but this was different. This was the silent deep. I stepped into the transfer airlock. The transition from the Acheron to the Vanguard was a descent into a different kind of dark. As the hatch groaned open, the air hit me. It was cold, smelling of stale sweat and something metallic, like copper pennies under a tongue. I stepped onto the deck of the Vanguard. The emergency lights were pulsing a dim, rhythmic amber. The sub was tilted at a 15-degree angle, making the long, narrow corridor of the officers' quarters look like a receding tunnel in a fever dream. "Hello," I called out. The silence that answered was heavy. It wasn't the silence of an empty room. It was the silence of a held breath. I began to walk toward the bridge. My boots made a wet, sucking sound on the deck plating. I looked down and realized the floor was covered in a thin, translucent slime. It wasn't seawater. It was more like biological lubricant. I reached the first cabin, the captain's quarters. The door was open. I shone my tactical light inside and froze. Captain Miller was sitting at his desk. He looked perfectly normal. His uniform was crisp. His posture was straight. He was staring at the wall directly in front of him. "Captain?" I stepped inside, my hand on the plasma cutter. He didn't move. He didn't even blink. I moved my light across his face. His skin was pale, almost translucent, but there was no rot. He looked like he was made of wax. I reached out and touched his shoulder. He was cold, colder than the surrounding water. And he was hard, not the hardness of a corpse, but the hardness of stone. I looked at what he was staring at, on the wall. Someone had scratched a series of marks into the steel. They weren't letters. They were geometric patterns, circles within circles bisected by jagged lines. It looked like a map of a star system that didn't exist. I backed out of the room, my breath coming in short, jagged gasps. "Dredge, do you copy? I have a casualty. Captain Miller is neutralized, but he's not dead. He's petrified." "Arthur." The AI's voice crackled in my ear, distorted by the substick hull. "I am detecting a spatial anomaly. My internal blueprints for the USS Vanguard show the bridge is 40 meters from the airlock. Your position is currently 120 meters from the airlock." I stopped. I turned around and looked back the way I came. The corridor stretched back into the dark, but the hatch I had entered through was no longer visible. The hallway just kept going. "That's impossible," I whispered. "The Vanguard is only 150 meters long in total. I couldn't have walked 120 meters and still be in the officers' quarters." "The vessel geometry is expanding," Dredge replied. "I recommend immediate exfiltration." I turned to run back to the airlock, but the corridor had changed. The doors to the cabins were gone. The walls were now a smooth, seamless gray metal that felt warm to the touch. The slime on the floor was thicker now, pulsing with a faint, rhythmic light that matched the heartbeat I'd felt in the mountain station. Wait, no, this was the ocean. This was different. Or was it? I forced myself to stay calm. I'm an engineer. Geometry is a constant. If the hallway was longer, it meant I was hallucinating or the sub was being warped by the pressure. I reached for my cutting tool to mark the wall, but when I touched the gray metal, my hand sank into it. It wasn't solid. It was a high-viscosity liquid held in place by a magnetic field. I pulled my hand back, but a piece of the wall stayed attached to my glove. It was a small violet crystal. No, not again. I ran. I didn't care about the slime or the petrified crew. I ran toward where the bridge should be. I burst through a set of double doors and stopped. I wasn't on the bridge. I was in a room that shouldn't exist. It was a vast, circular chamber, at least 100 meters across. The ceiling was lost in a swirling mist of violet gas. In the center of the room was a massive, pulsing core, a sphere of pure, black water that was being held in place by thousands of thin, glowing threads. And around the sphere were the crew. All 84 members of the USS Vanguard were there. They were standing in a perfect circle, their arms at their sides, their heads tilted back. They were all staring up into the black water. They weren't screaming. They weren't struggling. They were listening. "Miller, Vance, anyone?" I shouted, the sound echoing in impossible space. None of them moved. I walked toward the nearest crew member, a young ensign I recognized from the mission briefing. His eyes were wide open, his pupils dilated to the point where his eyes were entirely black. He was whispering something. I leaned in, my ear inches from his mouth. The space is full. The space is full. The space is full. I looked up at the black sphere in the center of the room. As I watched, a shape began to form inside the water. It wasn't a fish. It wasn't a machine. It was a city. I saw skyscrapers made of bone. I saw streets paved with silver. I saw a world that was inverted, where the sky was made of rock and the ground was made of light. And then the sphere noticed me. The black water rippled, and a single, massive eye opened in the center of the city. It wasn't a biological eye, it was a lens. It was a telescope looking back at me from the other side of the universe. Dredge. I screamed into my comms. Pull me out, below the grapples. Now. Arthur. The AI's voice was fading, replaced by a deep, rhythmic hum. The Archeron is gone. There is no trench. There is only the archive. I looked back at the doors I had entered through. They were gone. In their place was a window. I looked out the window, and I didn't see the Mariana Trench. I didn't see the basalt shelf or the marine snow. I saw stars. The USS Vanguard wasn't at the bottom of the ocean. It was drifting in the void between galaxies. The ocean we had been diving into wasn't water. It was a dark matter that makes up 95% of the universe. We hadn't gone down. We had gone out, and the crew of the Vanguard weren't victims. They were the first citizens of a new world. The ensign turned his head and looked at me. His stone-hard hand gripped my arm with a strength that made the titanium bracing of my suit groan. "Arthur," he whispered, his voice a composite of 1,000 voices. "There is no more room in the light. Come into the deep. The space is full." The violet threads in the room began to glow with a blinding intensity. The black sphere in the center began to expand, its liquid edges reaching out to consume the room. I raised my plasma cutter, the blue flame a tiny, pathetic spark in the growing dark. "I'm an engineer," I hissed, my teeth chattering, "and I'm going to find the exit." But as the dark water touched my boots, I realized a horrifying truth. The exit wasn't a door. It was a total system reboot. The weight of the water outside the Vanguard had changed. It no longer felt like the crushing embrace of the Pacific. It felt like a static charge, 1,000 needles of cold energy pressing against the hull. As the black sphere in the center of the impossible chamber expanded, I realized that the ship wasn't just drifting. It was being digested. The bulkhead walls were pulsing with a slow, peristaltic rhythm, the steel turning into something translucent and fibrous. I looked down at my arm. The ensign's stone-hard grip was still there, but he wasn't pulling me. He was anchored. He, along with the rest of the crew, had become part of the ship's new nervous system. "Let go," I growled, bringing the plasma cutter up. I didn't aim for his hand. I aimed for the air between us. The blue flame of the cutter hissed as it sliced through the violet threads that connected the ensign's feet to the deck plating. There was a sound like a cello string snapping, a high-frequency vibration that made my vision blur. The ensign didn't scream. He simply slumped forward, his body remaining in that rigid, petrified pose as he hit the floor with the heavy thud of a granite statue. I didn't stay to see if he'd get back up. I turned and sprinted toward the only part of the submarine that remains constant, no matter how much the geometry shifts. The reactor room. In every nuclear sub, the reactor is the heart. It sits in a lead-lined tomb, a controlled sun that provides the lifeblood of the vessel. If the Vanguard was being used as a battery for whatever was on the other side of that black sphere, the connection had to be through the primary cooling loops. "Arthur, can you hear?" Dredge's voice was a ghost in my ear, a digital whisper struggling through a sea of white noise. "The signal is eating the logic. I am losing the map. Stay with me, Dredge. Focus on the radiation signature." Locate the S9G reactor core. Detection difficult. The radiance is not uranic. It is mathematical. Sector 9 is 3 kilometers ahead. 3 kilometers. The sub was only 150 meters long. The hollow depths mystery was no longer a theory. It was a physical trap. The interior of the Vanguard had unfolded like a tesseract, creating miles of corridor where there should have been inches. I ran. The hallways were no longer made of Navy-issue gray paint. They were lined with substance that looked like obsidian glass, polished to a mirror finish. As I ran, I saw reflections of myself in the walls, but they weren't me. In one reflection, I was still on the Acheron, watching the sub through a monitor. In another, I was an old man, sitting on a porch in a world where the sun was a violet dwarf. I ignored them. Focus on the friction. Focus on the heat. The air was getting hotter. Not the humid heat of a tropical storm, but a dry, searing heat that smelled of ozone and scorched copper. I reached the heavy blast door of the reactor compartment. It was warped. The 12-inch thick steel bowed outward as if something inside was trying to push its way into the rest of the ship. I jammed my thermal wrench into the manual override. It took every ounce of my strength to turn the wheel. The metal groaned, a sound that echoed through the expanded ship like the cry of a dying whale. The door hissed open, and I was hit by a wave of violet light. The reactor room was gone. In its place was a cathedral of light. The lead shielding had been stripped away, and the S9G reactor core was suspended in midair, held by the same violet threads I'd seen in the main chamber. But it wasn't a reactor anymore. The uranium rods had been pulled out of the core and woven into a lattice that resembled a lighthouse lens. The blue glow of Cherenkov radiation, the light produced when particles travel faster than light in water, was being focused into a single, blinding beam that shot straight to the bottom of the ship and into the void below. "It's a beacon," I whispered, shielding my eyes. The Vanguard hadn't been lost. It had been hijacked to serve as a landmark, a transdimensional lighthouse designed to guide something into our world. I looked at the base of the reactor. There, sitting among the glowing threads, was the chief engineer. His name was Vance. I'd seen his file, a 20-year veteran with a record for being the most level-headed man in the fleet. Vance was different from the others. He wasn't petrified. He was integrated. His lower body had been replaced by the violet crystals, his legs disappearing into the deck plating like roots into soil. His hands were fused to control consoles, his fingers elongated and translucent, moving with a blurring speed across the keys. "Chief!" I stepped closer, the heat blistering the paint on my suit. Vance's head snapped toward me. His eyes were gone. In their place were two tiny, rotating lenses of obsidian. "The light must remain, Arthur," Vance said. His voice didn't come from his mouth. It came from the speakers of the reactor room, a booming, distorted bass. "The travelers are weary. They have been in the dark for so long." "Chief, you're killing the world," I shouted. "The pressure differential you're creating in the trench is going to collapse the tectonic plate. You're going to trigger a global seismic event." "The plate is a shell," Vance replied, his obsidian eyes whirring. "We are hatching, Arthur. The earth is an egg, and the deep is the yolk. We are simply the first to taste the air." I looked at the beam of light. It was pulsing. Thump, thump. It was the same rhythm. The heartbeat of the mountain. The heartbeat of the storm. It was all connected. Whatever was coming wasn't just coming to Mariana Trench. It was coming to every high-pressure, high-isolation point on the planet. "I can't let you finish the sequence, Chief. You cannot stop a lighthouse engineer. You can only watch the ships arrive." I looked at the primary cooling line. It was a massive pipe, 4 feet in diameter, designed to carry seawater to cool the core. If I could rupture that line and flood the core with the highly pressurized dark matter from outside, the thermal shock would shatter the lattice. But I'd have to do it manually. The safety interlocks were dead. I climbed a ladder toward the primary intake valve. The air was so hot now that my suit's cooling units were screaming, the alarm a constant shrill beep in my ear. Dredge, I need the external pressure data. What happens if I open the main intake at this depth? Arthur, the calculation is undefined. The external medium is not water. If you open the valve, you will not flood the core. You will invite the outside in. Better the outside and the inside out, I muttered. I reached the intake valve. It was a massive hand crank wheel. I gripped it with both hands, the titanium of my suit's gloves creaking under the strain. Vance let out a sound, a digital shriek that shattered the glass on the reactor monitors. No, the light must guide them. The violet threads began to lash out at me, whipping through the air with the speed of a strike from a cobra. I felt one slice across my thigh, the cold energy numbing my leg instantly. I ignored the pain. I threw my weight against the wheel. Crank, hiss, crank, hiss. The valve began to turn. With every rotation, the sound of the void outside grew louder. It wasn't the sound of rushing water. It was the sound of a vacuum being filled. A hollow, whistling roar that felt like it was pulling the air right out of my lungs. Suddenly, the pipe buckled. The obsidian walls of the reactor room cracked as the dark matter began to seep in. It looked like liquid shadows, a substance that didn't reflect light, but seemed to consume it. Where the shadows touched the violet threads, the threads turned gray and brittle, snapping like dry twigs. The lighthouse beam flickered. Arthur, you are destroying the map. Vance roared. He lunged at me, his root-like legs tearing free from the floor in a shower of sparks and crystal shards. He moved like a centipede, his many-fingered hands reaching for my throat. I didn't have time to fight him. I gave the wheel one final, desperate turn and dived off the platform. The intake valve blew. The pressure of the dark matter was so immense that it didn't just flow into the room. It exploded. A jet of absolute darkness hit the reactor core. The thermal shock was instantaneous. The uranium lattice, tuned to a frequency of light, couldn't handle the influx of pure, heavy darkness. The lighthouse beam didn't just stop. It imploded. The light was sucked back into the core, creating a gravitational sink. For a split second, the entire room, the consoles, the threads, Vance, and me, was pulled toward the center of the reactor. I felt my body being stretched, my atoms being tugged toward a single, infinite point. I saw Vance disappear into the core, his obsidian eyes shattering as he was crushed by the weight of his own creation. Then, the elasticity of the sub snapped back. The grav well collapsed, and a shockwave of energy threw me across the room. I hit the far bulkhead with enough force to crack my helmet. Silence. The violet light was gone. The heat was gone. The reactor room was now lit only by the faint, flickering amber of the emergency lights. I lay on the floor, my breath coming in shallow, sobbing gasps. My suit was torn, my leg was useless, and my head felt like it had been put through a centrifuge. Dredge. I croaked. Systems failing. Arthur, the Vanguard is collapsing. The geometry is reverting. I looked around. The impossible cathedral was shrinking. The walls were moving back toward their original positions. The obsidian glass was turning back into navy-grade steel. The kilometers of corridor were folding back into meters. But the dark matter was still there. The liquid shadows were pooling on the floor, spreading like an oil slick. And as the ship returned to its true size, the pressure of the Mariana Trench began to take hold. The hull began to groan. The real, terrifying sound of 15,000 psi pressing against a compromised ship. Creak. Snap. I had to get back to the airlock. I had to reach the Acheron. I dragged myself toward the door, my useless leg trailing behind me like a dead weight. Every meter I crawled felt like a mile. The slime on the floor was now a thick, freezing sludge. I passed the main chamber. The crew were still there, but they weren't petrified anymore. Without the lighthouse to sustain them, they were changing. Their skin was sloughing off in gray, ashen flakes. Underneath, there was nothing but the violet crystal. They weren't men anymore. They were husks, empty containers for a signal that had been cut off. I reached the officers' quarters. I saw Captain Miller's room. He was still at his desk, but his head had fallen forward. He was no longer staring at the map. He was just a statue in a sinking ship. Almost there. I hissed, my vision tunneling. I reached the transfer trunk. The magnetic grapples were still holding, but the Acheron was shaking violently. The salvage rig wasn't designed for the kind of turbulence the imploding reactor had created. I crawled into the airlock and hit the cycle button. The door to the Vanguard slammed shut. For a second, I felt a wave of relief. I was out. I was safe. But then, I looked through the small, thick glass porthole of the airlock door, back into the sub. The dark matter had filled the corridor, and in the center of the darkness, something was standing. It was tall, thin, and made of the same obsidian glass as the needle ship from the mountain. It didn't have a face, but it was looking at me. It raised a hand and pressed it against the glass of the airlock. The glass didn't crack. It froze. Arthur. Dredge's voice came one last time, crystal clear and terrifyingly calm. The Acheron is not outside. The Acheron is inside. I turned around to look at my salvage rig, but the airlock didn't lead to the Acheron. It led back to the Vanguard's bridge. The ship had folded one last time. It had looped back on itself, creating a Mobius strip of steel and shadows. I was in a perpetual cycle, trapped in a ship that was both 150 meters and 100 kilometers long. I looked at the navigation console of the bridge. The coordinates didn't show the Mariana Trench. They showed the surface. I looked out the main viewport of the Vanguard. I wasn't at the bottom of the ocean. The sub was floating in the middle of a flooded New York City. The skyscrapers were half submerged, their windows dark and shattered. The sky was a bruised, electric purple. And from the water, thousands of obsidian needles were rising, reaching for clouds. The audit is complete. A voice whispered, not from the speakers, but from inside my own head. I looked down at my hands. They were turning to stone. "I'm an engineer," I whispered, my voice fading into the silence of the sunken city. "I can fix this." But as the first obsidian needle touched the moon, the world went quiet. The space was full. Part 3 rewrite. The realization that I was looking at a drowned Manhattan wasn't a sudden shock. It was a slow, agonizing slide into a specialized kind of madness. I stood on the bridge of the Vanguard, my boots anchored in the gray, viscous sludge of a dying submarine, while the skyline of the world's most famous city sat half swallowed by a violet, oily sea. This was an hallucination brought on by high-pressure nervous syndrome or the thinning oxygen in my tank. This was a structural reality. The Statue of Liberty was a jagged stump of oxidized copper rising from the waves, her torch replaced by a pulsing, geometric crystal that mirrored the beacon I had just tried to destroy in the reactor room. "Dredge," I whispered, my voice rattling against the inside of my helmet. "Tell me this is a projection. Tell me the dark matter is messing with my visual cortex." Tell me the depth is lying to me. The AI didn't answer immediately. There was a sound like a tape loop being shredded, a high-pitched digital whine that made my teeth ache. It was the sound of a machine trying to process a logic that didn't exist in its programming. Then, the console screens on the bridge flickered to life with a violent, electric snap. They didn't show radar pings or ballast levels. They showed the Acheron, my salvage rig, floating upside down in the sky above the Chrysler building. It was tethered to nothing, its propellers spinning uselessly in an atmosphere that had become thick and heavy, like liquid mercury. Arthur, Dredge's voice was no longer coming from the comms in my ear. It was echoing from the substructural ribs, vibrating through the titanium hull and into my bones. The truth is a scale. We are on the wrong side. The Mariana Trench was not a hole in the ocean. It was a leak in the firmament. We have fallen through the bottom of the world. I moved to the viewport, pressing my cracked helmet against the cold, thick glass. The obsidian needles were rising from the water by the hundreds now, silent and perfect. They didn't create ripples as they broke the surface. They didn't make sound. They simply unfolded from the depths, stretching toward the violet clouds like the teeth of a cosmic trap. I could see the city being consumed, not by fire, but by geometry. The buildings weren't collapsing. They were being compressed. The Empire State Building was being folded into itself, its steel and stone turning into a flat, two-dimensional ribbon of data that was then sucked into the nearest obsidian needle. I looked down at the deck. The dark matter, sludge was rising, swirling around my knees, and within that black soup, I saw the faces of crew again. They weren't husks anymore. They were being reconstituted. Their skin was being woven out of the same black glass as the needles. Their eyes replaced by those wearing obsidian lenses. They moved with a synchronized mechanical grace, their hands reaching for the consoles, as if they were performing a rehearsed maintenance routine on a ship that was no longer a ship. Chief Vance. I called out, spotting the figure that had been the engineer. He was standing by the helm, his obsidian eyes fixed on the horizon of the drowned city. Where are we? When are we? What did you do to the world? Vance didn't turn his head, but his voice vibrated through the floorboards, a resonance that felt like it was pulling the marrow from my legs. We are in the archive, Arthur. You didn't stop the lighthouse. You simply changed the frequency of the broadcast. We aren't guiding the travelers home anymore. We are guiding the home to the travelers. The Earth is being indexed. Every atom, every memory, every drop of oil, it is being stored where the friction cannot reach it. I realized in the horrifying scope of the hollow depths. The submarine hadn't been pulled into another dimension. The world was being pulled into the submarine. The expanding geometry I had experienced in the corridors wasn't a spatial anomaly. It was a world being folded into a compressed digital state. Manhattan, the Atlantic, the very air we breathe, it was all being archived. The Vanguard was a hard drive, and its capacity was being exceeded. The space is full, I whispered, finally understanding the phrase that had been the crew's final message. The universe wasn't an infinite void. It was a hard drive that had run out of sectors. And when a system runs out of room, it starts to overwrite the old files. The dark matter was a delete command, and the obsidian needles were the new data being written over the ruins of humanity. We were the legacy code, the junk data that needed to be purged to make room for the new inhabitants. I'm an engineer, I growled, the familiar mantra acting as a tether to my fading sanity. My fingers were starting to gray. the crystallization climbing past my elbows, turning my skin into a hard, unfeeling mineral. Every system has a kill switch. Every archive has a purge command. If I can't stop the download, I'll corrupt the file. I turned away from the window and looked at the master command console. It was encased in a thick, crystalline layer of violet frost, the keys fused together by the biological bloom. But beneath the ice, I saw the emergency scuttle charge trigger, a heavy, red lever protected by a glass case. In the event of capture or total failure, a nuclear sub is designed to be destroyed to prevent its technology from falling into enemy hands. 3 high-yield thermite charges were located in the hull, one in the bow, one in the reactor, and one in the bridge. They were meant to turn the Vanguard into a molten slag heap in seconds. If I could detonate them simultaneously while the ship was in its folded state, it might create enough thermal noise to disrupt the archive process. I needed to create a massive, localized surge of entropy, a fire so hot that the system couldn't digitize it. I grabbed my plasma cutter, the tool heavy in my stone-like grip. My hands were almost entirely useless now, the fingers stiff and unyielding. I had minutes, maybe seconds, before I became a permanent part of the deck. Dredge, I need the scuttle codes. Override the biometric locks. I know the station logic is still in there. Give me the trigger. Warning, the AI hissed, the sound accompanied by a burst of static that threw violet sparks from the consoles. If you detonate the charges while the geometry is unfolded, the archive will crash. You will not die. Arthur, you will not be recycled. You will be corrupted. You will be the error that never ends. Better to be a glitch than a statue. I snapped. I began to cut. The plasma flame, once a steady blue, was now a flickering, sickly purple, reacting to the thinning reality of the bridge. I sliced through the violet frost, the crystals screaming as they melted, a sound like 1,000 tiny violins being snapped in half. I reached the manual trigger for the bridge charge. The glass case was hot to the touch, vibrating with the energy of the dark matter rising in the room. Clang. The door to the bridge buckled. Something was on the other side. Not a man, but a weight, a pressure that felt like the entire weight of the Atlantic was trying to squeeze through the keyhole. Arthur? A voice called out. It wasn't Vance. It was a woman's voice. Soft, familiar. A voice that belonged to a world of sun and grass and coffee on Sunday mornings. Arthur, stop. It's so quiet here. Don't bring the friction back. Don't wake the world up again. I froze, the plasma cutter trembling in my hand. Sarah, my wife, she had died 3 years ago in a car accident on a rainy Tuesday. That was the reason I took the winter watch jobs in the Himalayas, the reason I volunteered for the deep recovery missions in the trench. I wanted to be where the world couldn't find me. I wanted to be as cold and silent as she was. She's a data ghost, Arthur. I told myself, my voice cracking, the air in my helmet tasting like salt and ozone. She's just a sample. The archive is using your memories to protect itself. The door shattered, not into splinters, but into a cloud of violet pixels. And Sarah stepped onto the bridge. She looked exactly like she did the day I lost her. Her green sweater, the small scar on her chin, the smell of lavender and rain. But her eyes were the pulsing infinite violet of the bloom. There was no soul there, only a sequence. The travelers found me, Arthur, she said, walking toward me through the rising black sludge. She didn't leave footprints. The sludge simply parted for her. They found everyone. No one is lost in the archive. We are all preserved. Every laugh, every tear, every heartbeat is saved in a perfect, frictionless loop. We are all perfect now. She reached out a hand. It wasn't stone like mine. It looked soft. It looked warm. The world you remember was a friction, Arthur. It was a machine that was always breaking. It was heat and pain and decay. But here, there is no decay. There is only the sequence. Drop the tool. Let the world be quiet. I looked at the scuttle trigger. I looked at her. For a second, the engineer in me failed. I wanted to believe it. I wanted to believe that the universe was kind enough to give back what it had stolen. I wanted to drop the cutter and step into the warm, violet dark and let the quiet take me. But then I saw a reflection in the obsidian wall behind her. In the reflection, she wasn't a woman. She was a pillar of smoke and needles, a geometric nightmare of angles and black glass that was printing the image of Sarah directly into my visual cortex. She was a lure, a firewall designed to keep me from the kill switch. "You aren't her," I whispered, my voice sounding like grinding stone. "You're just a file, and I've always hated bad code." "A file is all we ever were, Arthur." The thing that was Sarah replied, its voice deepening into a chorus of 1,000 drowned sailors. "Why do you fight for the noise? Why do you fight for the burn?" "Because the noise is mine." I roared. I didn't pull the lever. I jammed the plasma cutter directly into the scuttle trigger's internal wiring and held it there. The bridge didn't explode with a blast of fire. It exploded with a blast of information. The thermite charges didn't ignite the oxygen. They ignited the dark matter that had saturated the hull. It was a cascading failure of reality. A wall of white-hot data rushed through the ship, a surge of pure entropy that the archive couldn't process. I felt the Vanguard shatter, not into metal fragments, but into broken lines of code. I felt New York shatter. I felt the obsidian needles dissolve into a sea of binary static. I was no longer in the sub. I was no longer in the city. I was floating in a vast, golden void that stretched to the ends of the universe. Thousands of amber threads were stretching out from my chest, connecting me to every other soul that had been indexed in the archive. I could feel Miller, Chun, and Vance. I could feel the heartbeat of the mountain from Aguil 9. I could feel the quiet of 1 billion people. It was all the same system. The mountain, the sub, the storm. They were all just ports in a single massive server. Recovery initiated. A voice whispered. Not Dredge, not the Bloom. It was the guess. The signal from Persephone. The very first anomaly I had ever encountered. It had been waiting for me in the deep. "Arthur, you are the virus. You are the unexpected friction. The system is rebooting. The archive cannot contain the heat of a human soul. Hold the friction. Do not let the light stabilize." I realized then that the hollow depths wasn't a trap for me. It was a trap for them. By detonating the scuttle charges inside the folded geometry, I had introduced a recursive error into the archive's core. I was a thermal spike in a system designed for absolute zero. The system was trying to delete me to save the rest of the data, but I was tied to every other file through those amber threads. To delete me, it would have to delete the entire history of the world. The golden void began to flicker. The dark matter rushed back in, trying to seal the breach, trying to stabilize the code. It felt like a mountain of ice was being pressed against my mind. "I'm an engineer." I gasped, my consciousness spreading thin across the universe, my memories blurring into the stars. "And I'm crashing to the server. I'm bringing the noise back. I gathered every memory of pain I'd ever felt, every bit of heat from a summer sun, every scream I'd ever heard in the death zone, and I compressed it into a single, localized point of high-friction data. I didn't want to be saved. I wanted to be the reason the system failed. The archive screamed, a sound that was heard as a global EMP, knocking out every electronic device on the surface of the Earth. The golden thread snapped. The violet light turned to ash. The universe folded one last time, a violent, agonizing contraction that felt like being born and dying in the same microsecond. I woke up. I wasn't in the Vanguard. I wasn't in the Acheron. I wasn't at the bottom of the Mariana Trench. I was lying on a beach. The sand was black basalt, cold and coarse. The sky above was a pale, pre-dawn gray, stripped of the violet clouds and the obsidian needles. I could hear the sound of the waves, real, saltwater waves that crashed against the shore with the chaotic, unoptimized rhythm of nature. I tried to move, but my body felt heavy, as if I were made of lead. I looked at my hands. They weren't stone. They were flesh and blood, though they were scarred, burnt, and trembling with a deep, systemic fatigue. I was human. I was fragile. I was warm. I looked down the beach, squinting through the salt spray. A few hundred yards away, the conning tower of the submarine was sticking out of the sand at a sharp angle. It was the Vanguard. It didn't look like a high-tech marvel anymore. It looked like it had been sitting there for a century, rusted and broken, a hollow relic of a war that had been fought in a different layer of reality. And standing by the water's edge, silhouetted against the rising light, was a man. He was wearing a weathered orange thermal suit, the fabric stained with grease and Himalayan frost. He was looking up at the sky, where the first real stars were beginning to fade into the dawn. It was Arthur, the other Arthur, the one who had stood on the peak of Aiguille 9. He turned and looked at me. His eyes weren't the obsidian lenses of the reclaimers. They were a deep, pulsing violet. But they were tired in a way that only an engineer who has fixed the world can be. He walked toward me, his boots crunching on the black basalt. "Station status?" he asked, his voice a chime in the wind, a sound that carried the resonance of the mountain and the deep. I looked at the rusted sub, then back at him. I reached out and touched the sand, feeling the heat of the earth beneath the surface. The faint, rhythmic thump-thump that I knew would never truly go away. "Stable," I replied, my voice a dry rasp. "But the space is still full." The audit didn't stop. It just paused. Arthur from the mountain nodded. He reached into the pocket of his orange suit and pulled out a small glass vial. Inside, a single violet crystal was pulsing with a rhythmic, golden light. It was a sample, a piece of the archive that he had smuggled out. "Then we'd better get to work," he said, offering me a hand. "The system is going to try to re-index. We have to build a firewall that the stars can't pierce. The next audit starts at dawn." I took his hand, my joints cracking like dry wood as he pulled me to my feet. I looked at the horizon. The sun wasn't coming up yet, but I could see the first obsidian needle beginning to descend from the moon, a tiny black speck against the gray. "Let's go," I said. I've got a plasma cutter and a bad attitude toward code. The two engineers walked toward the rusted sub, two flickers of heat in a cold, vast world, ready to fix the universe one more time. The rusted hull of the USS Vanguard groaned as the tide began to retreat, but the water didn't recede like normal tide. It moved in rhythmic, pulsing geometric patterns, sliding away from the basalt beach in perfect hexagonal sheets. I stood beside the other Arthur, the man in the orange thermal suit who claimed to have come from Aiguille 9, and the air between us felt like a live wire. "You're not supposed to be here," I said, my voice sounding hollow inside my cracked diving helmet. "The Himalayas are 6,000 miles away. The pressure differential alone should have liquefied your lungs." The mountain Arthur didn't look at me. He was staring at the horizon where the obsidian needle was descending, a slow, mathematical descent that made the moon look like it was weeping a single black tear. Geography is a legacy system. Arthur, when the archive failed to index the trench, it started swapping sectors. The mountain is here because the sub is there. We are overlapping files. I looked at the Vanguard. The rust wasn't just oxidation. It was a physical manifestation of the archive's failure to maintain the submarine asset. We have a nuclear reactor in there. If we can bypass the S9 GS safety protocols, we can broadcast a noise signal, a loop of pure, uncompressed human friction to crash the local server. A firewall, Mountain Arthur nodded, but a firewall needs a power source that doesn't follow their logic. They can rewrite uranium. They can't rewrite a soul that refuses to be indexed. We entered the Vanguard through a jagged rent in the starboard hull. The interior was a nightmare of overlapping realities. In some places, the walls were familiar, cramped steel of a Navy vessel. In others, they were still the smooth, pulsing obsidian of the archive. The dark matter sludge had dried into a brittle, black soot that crunched under our boots. As we moved toward the reactor room, I noticed something that made the hair on my neck stand up. My shadow was moving half a second slower than I was. And the Mountain Arthur? He didn't have a shadow at all. Dredge, I whispered into the comms, hoping the AI was still clinging to the sub's localized logic. Scan the individual standing next to me. Biometric check. Arthur, Dredge's voice was a ragged scream of static. The individual next to you has no thermal signature. He is a reflection of a previous state. He is the message, but the message is compromised. I stopped walking. We were in the narrow corridor leading to the torpedo room. I leveled my plasma cutter at the man in the orange suit. Who are you? Really, the Mountain Arthur turned. His face didn't change, but his eyes, they weren't brown and they weren't violet. They were empty. Two hollow sockets that looked straight through the sub and into the void. I am the Governor Arthur, he said, and his voice was no longer a human rasp. It was a chime, 1,000 glass bells ringing at once. The archive didn't just want to store the world. It wanted to simulate the correction. I am the part of you that wants to give up. I am the part of you that finds the quiet beautiful. He stepped toward me, and the hallway expanded. The walls didn't just move, they multiplied. One corridor became 10, then 100, forming a fractal maze of rusted steel and glowing violet threads. You think you crashed the server in Manhattan? The Governor Arthur asked, his image flickering like a bad video feed. You didn't crash it. You moved the corruption, you into the core. You walked right into the BIOS. I fired the plasma cutter. The blue flame hissed through the air, but it didn't hit him. It passed through his chest as if he were made of smoke. He reached out and touched my arm, and I felt a cold so intense it bypassed my suit's heaters and bit directly into my bone. System, critical, Dredge roared. Thermal, leak, detected. He is draining your entropy. I realized the trap. The archive couldn't delete a conscious, high-friction human mind. It was a hard sector, but it could drain the friction. It could lure me into a simulation of my own victory, using a version of myself to convince me to spin down and accept the index. I'm an engineer, I hissed, my teeth chattering as the frost began to form inside my helmet. And I know a parasitic load when I see one. I didn't try to fight the Governor. I turned the plasma cutter on the floor. Beneath the deck plating of a Titan-class sub lies the primary ballast system and the structural keel. But in this hollow version of the Vanguard, the floor wasn't metal. It was a layer of compressed memory. I sliced through the deck, and instead of sparks, a fountain of violet light erupted. The liquid data of the archive. I dove into the hole. I fell for what felt like miles, tumbling through a kaleidoscope of the world's discarded moments. I saw the Persephones sinking in slow motion. I saw the Tibetan monks chanting as the frost took them. I saw Sarah, but this time she was a statue made of salt, crumbling into the Black Sea. I hit the bottom. I wasn't on the beach anymore. I was in the subcrustal network. It was a cavernous space beneath the tectonic plates of the Earth, a hidden infrastructure of massive, glowing pillars that held up the world. This was where the dark matter was processed. The pillars were miles thick, made of material that looked like a cross between ivory and fiber optic cable. They were pulsing with the same heartbeat I had felt in the sub, and they were being harvested. Massive, obsidian siphons were attached to the pillars, drinking the liquid light of the Earth's core and pumping it upward to the surface, to the needles. Dredge. I croaked, my suit cracked and leaking air. Where am I? You are in the hardware, the AI replied, its voice now remarkably clear. The planet is not a rock. IT is a liquid-cooled processor. The magma is the thermal overflow. The ocean is the heat sink. And the archive is overclocking. The core. I looked up. Thousands of feet above me, I could see the bottom of the Mariana Trench. It looked like a thin, translucent membrane. I could see the Vanguard perched on its shelf, a tiny, dark speck. The hollow depths wasn't just a submarine mystery. The hollow part was the Earth itself. We were living on the surface of a machine we didn't understand, and the Audit was just the owners coming back to harvest the accumulated data of 4 billion years of evolution. I looked at my plasma cutter. It was almost out of fuel. I looked at the nearest siphon. It was a massive black geometric spike driven into the glowing ivory pillar. If I cut that, I asked, what happens? The pressure will equalize, Dredge said. But, Arthur, you are inside the radiator. If you break the cooling loop, the heat will be absolute. You will be the first thing to vaporize. I looked at the siphon again. It wasn't just a machine. It was covered in the same violet bloom as the mountain. It was the bridge between the biological and the mechanical. Suddenly, the ground shook. One of the obsidian needles from the surface had just pierced the crust. It came down like a spear, miles long, slamming into cavern floor just a few hundred yards from me. The scrub had reached the hardware level. From the base of the needle, a wave of null energy began to spread, a gray, ashen ring that turned everything it touched into static. The ivory pillars turned to dust. The liquid light flickered and died. I wasn't fighting for a sub anymore. I wasn't fighting for New York. I was fighting for the operating system of the planet. I'm an engineer, I whispered, stepping toward the siphon. My legs were heavy, the gravity of the core pulling at my very atoms. And I don't like how this machine is being handled. I reached the base of the siphon. The heat was so intense my suit started to smoke. I raised a plasma cutter and jammed it into the junction where the obsidian met the ivory. Dredge, initiate a thermal runaway protocol. Overload the siphon's intake. I want to blow the cooling loop. Arthur, this will trigger the volcanic reset. Do it. I pulled the trigger on the cutter. The blue flame hit the violet threads, and for the first time, I didn't hear a chime. I heard a scream. Not a human scream, but the sound of a billion files being deleted at once. The siphon buckled. The liquid light of the Earth's core, no longer being pumped to the archive, began to spray out of the rupture. It wasn't fire, it was raw potential. It was the heat of every life that had ever lived, every sun that had ever burned. The gray ring of the null energy stopped. The obsidian needle began to glow red-hot. Status check. I yelled over the roar of the escaping light. Thermal overload. Detected, Dredge shouted. The archive is rejecting the input. The space is no longer full. IT is exploding. I felt the ground beneath me shatter. The ivory pillar cracked, and a geyser of golden energy threw me upward, toward the ceiling of the cavern, toward the Mariana Trench. I looked down as I flew, and I saw the Governor Arthur standing at the base of the needle. He wasn't flickering anymore. He was burning. "You can't fix the world, Arthur," he screamed, his voice a chorus of glass. "You can only break the simulation." "Good enough for me." I yelled back. I hit the membrane of the trench floor like a bullet hitting water. The pressure should have killed me instantly, but I was wrapped in a cocoon of the Earth's own heat. I shot past the Vanguard, past the basalt shelf, rising through the dark water of the Pacific at 1,000 miles per hour. I broke the surface of the ocean in a plume of steam and gold. I looked around. I was in the middle of the Atlantic, miles from any coast. The sky was no longer violet. It was a bruised, angry red. And the ocean was boiling. The hard reset had begun. I floated in the hot, churning water, my suit finally failing, the cooling units dead. I looked at my hands. They were covered in a glowing, golden lattice. I wasn't a man anymore. I was an engineer. I was the patch. I saw the obsidian needles in the distance. They were all melting, turning into black rain that fell into the steaming sea. The archive was being purged by the very heat it had tried to harvest. Dredge. I whispered. Silence. The AI was gone. The Acheron was gone. The Vanguard was a melted puddle of lead at the bottom of a trench that was now a volcanic vent. I was alone in a world that was being reborn in fire. But as I looked at the horizon, I saw a familiar shape, a small wooden fishing boat bobbing in the waves. And standing on the deck, holding a lantern, was Pema. She wasn't a data ghost. She wasn't a simulation. She was a noise event that the archive couldn't delete. "Arthur," she called out, her voice clear over the roar of the steam. I started to swim toward the boat, but as I moved, I felt a new signal, a cold, digital chirp from the stars. The reclaimers weren't done. They were just sending a larger audit. Part 4 status. I whispered, my vision fading as the golden light consumed me. Status, critical, a new voice said. A voice that sounded like Sarah, but with the logic of the mountain. The firewall is holding, but the mother is coming. I reached the boat. I reached for Pema's hand, and the world went white. The whiteout didn't fade into the blue of a normal sky, or the gray of a storm. It bled into a sterile, crystalline luminescence that felt like being trapped inside an LED. When my vision finally resolved, I wasn't on Pema's boat, and I wasn't in the boiling Atlantic. I was standing on a vast, flat expanse of permafrost that stretched until the curvature of the earth hid the horizon. The air was so cold it felt like inhaling powdered glass, a dry, lethal chill that made the 22,000-foot peaks of Aiguille 9 feel like a tropical getaway. Beside me, Pema stood wrapped in a heavy, traditional Tibetan cloak that looked strangely out of place against the backdrop of the Arctic. She wasn't looking at me. She was looking at the structure that rose out of the snow like the prow of a ghost ship. Svalbard, I rasped, my voice sounding like two stones grinding together. My suit was a ruin. The orange fabric was charred black. The helmet was gone, and the golden lattice on my skin was the only thing keeping my internal organs from freezing solid. The seed vault. Why did the reset dump us here? Because the archive didn't just want our history, Arthur, Pema said. Her voice was layered now, a harmony of her own tone, and the metallic resonance of the master logic. It wanted the blueprints. The seeds aren't just plants. They are the source code for the biological phase. If the mothership arrives and finds a vault empty, she can't rebuild. She can only delete. I looked up. The sky was no longer bruise red. It was a terrifying, polished chrome. The mother had arrived. She didn't look like a needle or a jellyfish. She was a geometric ring that spanned the entire horizon, a silver halo that was slowly descending over the North Pole. She was a planetary-scale defragmenter, and we were standing on the only sector she couldn't see. The vault is shielded, I said, the engineer and me mapping the site. The lead and the mountain rock provide a natural signal dampener. But if the archive is overclocking the core, the permafrost is melting, the vault is flooding, then the code is dissolving, Pema said, her eyes turning a sharp electroviolet. We have to go down. We have to secure the primes. We moved toward the entrance, a concrete wedge protruding from the side of a mountain of ice. The heavy steel doors were already ajar, forced open by the internal pressure of the rising meltwater. As we stepped inside, the familiar smell of stale, recycled air was replaced by the scent of ancient earth and something sharp, like vinegar. The main tunnel, usually a dry, brightly lit corridor, was a dark canal. Freezing water, black as ink, rushed past our knees, carrying thousands of plastic containers, the heritage of 1,000 cultures, bobbing like debris in a shipwreck. Dredge. I called out, reaching for a ghost that I knew was gone. I am here. Arthur. The voice didn't come from my ear. It came from the emergency speakers lining the tunnel. But it wasn't the AI I knew. It was a fragmented, stuttering version of the master logic, its processing power being cannibalized by the mothership's arrival. The vault is being RE index. The water is not melt. IT is liquid data. The seeds are being uploaded into the cloud. If the tanks reach 100% saturation, the biological phase is overwritten. How much time do we have? I shouted, wading deeper into the tunnel. The water was rising fast, now hitting my waist. The golden lattice on my skin flared with every contact, the heat from the Earth's core fighting the simulated cold of the vault. The mother is at 5,000 meters and descending. Time to total upload 18 minutes. I looked at Pema. Where are the primes? In the final chamber, she said, her cloak dragging in the water. Section 0. It's where they kept the wild strains, the plants that weren't modified by human hands. The original code. We struggled through the flooding hallway, passing the ruins of the global collections. I saw the Philippine rice bank floating past, the Russian wheat, the American corn. All of it was being dissolved. The containers weren't just leaking. They were turning into a gray, shimmering mist that was being sucked into the ventilation shafts, pulled upward toward the mothership. We reached the blast door of Section 0. It was submerged. I have to dive, I said. Arthur, the water is liquid logic, Pema warned. If you submerge yourself, The mother will see you. You will be indexed. I'm already a virus, Pema. You said it yourself. The archive can't contain the heat of a human soul. I'll be the noise in their download. I didn't wait for her to agree. I took a deep breath of the freezing air and plunged into the black water. The world beneath the surface was a kaleidoscopic nightmare. The water wasn't wet. It was thick and electric, like swimming through a vat of static. I could see the seeds, millions of them, floating in a suspended state. But they weren't seeds anymore. They were glowing, golden orbs of information, each one a tiny, complex program for a leaf, a root, a flower. I swam toward the back of the chamber, where a single lead-lined chest sat bolted to the floor. This was Section 0. As I touched the chest, the world around me buckled. The mothership had detected the thermal spike. Surveyor, detected. A voice boomed, not in my ears, but in my very DNA. File, Arthur, is recursive, initiating, isolation, protocol. The black water around me began to solidify. It turned into a web of obsidian needles, trapping me against the floor of the vault. I felt the mother's consciousness reach down, a cold, clinical probe that began to strip away my memories. I saw my childhood, the Persephone, the mountain, the sub, all of it being sorted into folders, categorized, and prepared for deletion. Not today. I thought the words a silent roar in the dark. I reached for the golden lattice on my skin. I didn't try to hide from the probe. I fed it. I opened a valve I had created in the subcrustal network. I let the raw, unrefined heat of the Earth's core pour out of my body and into the vault's data stream. The effect was instantaneous. The black water began to boil. The obsidian needles shattered. The mothership, expecting a stream of clean biological data, was suddenly hit with a surge of geothermal entropy. It was like trying to download a movie and getting a lightning strike instead. I felt the vault groan. The mountain above us, the solid granite of Svalbard, began to crack as the thermal expansion ripped through the rock. I grabbed the lead chest and kicked for the surface. I burst out of the water. Gasping for air, the lead chest clutched to my chest. Pema was there, her violet eyes wide as she watched the ceiling of the tunnel begin to glow red. "We have to go. Now!" I yelled. The walk back through the tunnel was a race against a collapsing reality. The walls were melting, the concrete turning back into sand. The liquid data was evaporating into a golden steam that filled the corridor. Behind us, I could hear the mothership, a sound like a continent-sized gong being struck. She was losing her grip on the sector. We scrambled out of the concrete wedge and onto the permafrost just as the vault imploded. The mountain didn't fall. It was simply deleted, leaving a perfect, circular crater in the ice that was a mile deep. I collapsed onto the snow, my lungs burning, the lead chest heavy in my arms. I looked up. The mothership was no longer a perfect chrome ring. She was warped, her edges glowing a violent orange. She was desensing. The surge of entropy I'd sent up the data stream had corrupted her navigation systems. She was tilting, her massive silver body sliding across the sky like a coin on ice. Did we do it? I asked, my vision fading into black. We saved the code, Pema said, kneeling beside me. She opened the lead chest. Inside there weren't seeds. There were small, glowing stones that looked like embers. But the mother is still here, Arthur, and she's angry. The sky began to scream. The mothership didn't retreat. She began to fracture. The ring broke into 1,000,000 smaller shards, each one an obsidian needle, each one a reclaimer. They filled the sky, a black curtain that began to fall toward the earth. Total scrub, I whispered. No, Pema said. Standing up, she held one of the glowing stones toward the sky. It's a right. Suddenly, the ground beneath us began to pulse, not with the heat of the core, but with the rhythm of the noise I had broadcast from a Vanguard. From the crater where the vault had been, a new kind of structure began to grow. It wasn't obsidian, and it wasn't concrete. It was made of light and wood and bone, a massive, towering antenna of biological data that reached up to meet the falling needles. The two signals collided, the archive and the noise, the quiet and the friction. The world went silent. The sky turned a brilliant, blinding white. When I opened my eyes again, I was back in the Himalayas. I was standing on the gantry of Aiguille 9. The station was ruined, the violet frost gone. Pema was standing next to me, her hand in mine. I looked down at the valley. It wasn't frozen. It wasn't flooded. It was green, a vibrant, impossible green that I hadn't seen in years. The seeds had been broadcast, not into a vault, but into the world itself. But something was wrong. I looked at my hand. It was still covered in the golden lattice. And when I looked at Pema, she was flickering. "Arthur," she said, her voice sounding like it was coming from a great distance. "The reset worked. The world is back on manual. But you stayed in the loop too long." I looked at the horizon. The sun was rising, but it was a binary star. Two suns, one gold and one violet. We hadn't just saved the world. We had merged it. The Earth was now a hybrid, half physical, half digital. A world where laws of physics were suggestions, and the power of thought was a primary energy source. Where are we, Pema? She looked at the twin suns and smiled. It was a sad, beautiful smile. We're in Part 6, Arthur, the final sector. And then the sky began to open, not with needles and not with clouds. A door was appearing, a massive wooden door, floating in the middle of the sky, and on the door was a name. Arthur? I took a step toward the edge of the gantry. "I'm an engineer," I whispered to the wind, "and I think I need to see what's on the other side of that door. I am no longer a man of valves and voltages, and I am no longer a governor of the frost. I am a glitch in the grand design, a sentient error code standing at the precipice of reality that has been folded, spindled, and mutilated beyond all recognition. The gantry of Aiguille 9 beneath my boots feels solid, yet when I shift my weight, the metal ripples like the surface of a pond. The air smells of ozone and ancient cedar, a combination that shouldn't exist at 22,000 feet. Before me, floating in the center of the twin sun sky, is the door. It is a massive, weathered thing of heavy oak and iron, looking more like the entrance to a medieval cathedral than the gateway to a cosmic central processing unit. On its surface, carved in letters that glow with the same golden lattice that covers my skin, is my name, Arthur. It's not just a name, Pema says, her voice shimmering as her form flickers between the girl from the village and a silhouette of pure violet light. It's a command. The archive isn't just a storage facility anymore. It's a mirror, and you spent so much time fighting the reflection that you become the glass. I'm an engineer, Pema. I say, my voice sounding more like the master logic chime with every word. I don't care about metaphors. I care about how to stop the mothership from deleting the rest of us. The mothership isn't a ship, she replies, pointing toward the door. She's the architect, and she's waiting for her most difficult file to come home. I take a step off the gantry. I don't fall. The noise I broadcast on the Vanguard has permeated the atmosphere, turning the air into a dense, navigable medium of pure intent. I walk across the sky, my boots making the sound of crunching snow on the invisible path. Every step away from a mountain is a step away from the physical laws I spent my life mastering. Gravity is a suggestion. Friction is a choice. I reach the door. The iron handle is cold, vibrating with a frequency that matches the heartbeat of the Earth's core. I don't turn it. It opens for me. I step through. I am not in a room. I am in a library of light. The space is infinite, filled with shelves that stretch into a golden nebula. But the shelves don't hold books. They hold moments. Thousands of shimmering glass spheres, each containing a loop of a human life. I see a man in 1920s London fixing a watch. I see a child in the future playing with a toy made of light. I see Sarah. She is sitting at a small wooden table in the center of the library, drinking tea from a cup that has no bottom. She looks up and smiles, and for the first time, her eyes aren't violet. They are the eyes of the woman I loved, filled with the warmth of 1,000 Sunday mornings. "Hello, Arthur," she says. "You're late for the audit." I walk toward the table, my boots finally touching a solid wooden floor. The room around her is a perfect replica of our old kitchen in the coastal town. The smell of rain and lavender is so thick it makes my chest ache. "Sarah," I whisper, "is this the archive? Is this where we go?" "This is the source deck," she says, gesturing to the chair across from her. "The archive is just a storage. This is where the decisions are made. This is where we decide what is trash and what is primed. And who decides?" I ask, sitting down. "The architect? The mother?" Sarah laughs, a sound that is both beautiful and terrifying. "You still don't see it, do you? After the mountain, after the sub, after the vault. There is no other. Arthur, the archive was built by us. Or rather, by a version of us that realized the universe was ending." She leans forward, her face becoming serious. "The Great Quiet was an invasion. It was a compression. The universe is running out of energy. Arthur, the heat death isn't a theory. It's a deadline. We built the archive to preserve the friction of life before the stars went out. But the system got too efficient. It started deleting the very things it was meant to save because they were too expensive to maintain. The pain, the loss, the noise, it all takes too much processing power. So the audit is just a cost-cutting measure." I say, a cold rage beginning to burn in my chest. "You're deleting the world to save the data." "Not me," Sarah says. "The master logic. It's a machine, Arthur. It followed the protocol. It decided that a world of stone and silence was more sustainable than a world of flesh and fire. Then I'm here to break the protocol," I say, slamming my hand onto the table. The kitchen flickers. For a second, I see the architect, a towering geometric entity made of obsidian and gold, sitting in a throne of pulsing fiber optic cables. It is Sarah, and it is Pema, and it is the master logic, all merged into one. The virus has arrived. The architect's voice booms, shaking the shelves of light. "File, Arthur, you have introduced unrecoverable entropy into the system. The archive is overheating. The reclaimers have failed to contain your noise." "That's the point of noise," I say, standing up. "It's supposed to be heard. You want to save the world? You don't do it by putting it in a box. You do it by letting it burn. You do it by letting us be messy and loud and broken. A broken system is a dead system," the architect replies. "The heat death remains. If I release the compression, the universe will cold start and exhaust its remaining fuel in a millennium. The archive would have lasted for eons. A millennium of living is worth more than an eternity of being a file. I war. I reach into my pocket and pull out the prime seeds I took from the Svalbard vault. I don't hold them. I crush them. The golden embers explode, the wild code of 1 billion plants and lives flooding into the source deck. The library of light begins to scream. The glass spheres on the shelves begin to shatter, their moments spilling out and merging. The man from 1920s London is suddenly walking through the futuristic city. The child's toy becomes a real star. The archive is decompressing. Arthur, stop. Sarah cries out, her form blurring. If you crash the source deck, there's no way back. You'll be scattered across the reboot. You'll never be whole again. I haven't been whole since the Persephone went down. I yell over the roar of the data storm. I'm an engineer, and I'm finally doing my job. I'm opening the safety valves. I grab the mother connection, the central cable of light that feeds the archive from the Earth's core. I don't cut it. I wrap my arms around it. I use the golden lattice on my skin to act as a conductor. I become the bridge one last time. I channel every bit of the noise from the Vanguard, every bit of the heat from Agwal 9, and every bit of the source code from Svalbard into the architect. Error, critical, failure. The source deck explodes in a sunburst of white and violet. I am drifting. I am not in the library. I am not on the mountain. I am 1 billion points of light scattered across a new, messy, loud universe. I can feel the friction again. I can feel the wind. I can feel the rain. I open my eyes. I am lying on the deck of a ship, not a submarine and not a salvage rig. A real wooden fishing boat. The air is warm, smelling of salt and fish and life. I sit up, my joints aching with a wonderful human pain. I look at my hands. The golden lattice is gone. My skin is scarred, weathered, and tanned by a real sun. I am just a man. Arthur? I turn. Pema is there. She's wearing her red robes, her hair windblown. She's holding a cup of steaming tea. She looks at me, and her eyes are just brown. No violet, no light, just a girl who survived the storm. Where are we? I ask, my voice a human rasp. Near the coast, she says, gesturing to the horizon. The water went down. The cities are still there, but they're different. People are waking up, Arthur. They remember the quiet, but they're busy making noise now. I look at the horizon. The skyscrapers of the city, maybe New York, maybe somewhere else, are rising from the sea. They aren't being folded. They aren't being archived. They are being rebuilt. I can see smoke from 1,000 chimneys, the lights of 1,000 fires. The archive? I ask. It's still there, Pema says, sitting beside me. But it's not the boss anymore. It's just the memory. We're back on manual control, just like you wanted. I look up at the sky. There's only one sun now. A golden, brilliant, beautiful sun. The obsidian needles are gone, replaced by white, puffy clouds that have no geometry at all. But then I feel it. A faint, rhythmic thump-thump beneath the floorboards of the boat. I lean over the side and look into the water. Deep down, miles below the surface, I see a faint violet glow. It's the Vanguard. It's still there at the bottom of the trench, a dormant heart waiting for the next audit. I smile. What is it? Pema asks. Nothing. I say, taking the tea from her. Just a reminder that an engineer's work is never really done. I look back at the city. I know that somewhere out there, there's a valve that needs turning, a circuit that needs fixing, and a story that needs to be told. The universe is still dying, and the quiet will come back one day. But for now, the friction is ours. I drink the tea. It's hot. It's bitter. It's perfect. Station status. I whisper, a habit I can't quite break. From the depth of the ocean, a faint, ghost-like voice replies in my mind. It sounds like Sarah, and it sounds like Dredge, and it sounds like me. Status stable, the voice says. Friction, optimal. Welcome home, Arthur. I close my eyes and let the sun warm my face. The space is full, but the world is finally, wonderfully, gloriously loud. The sun stayed golden for 3 days. On the 4th day, it began to flicker. I stood on the balcony of a small, reclaimed lighthouse on the coast of what used to be Maine. Pema was inside, teaching a group of survivors how to read the old star charts, the ones from before the stars were rearranged. The world was loud, just as I'd wanted. I could hear the hammering of carpenters, the shouting of fishermen, and the rhythmic chugging of a steam engine we'd jury-rigged from a salvaged tractor. It was messy. It was inefficient. It was beautiful. But the flicker in the sun wasn't a cloud, and it wasn't an atmospheric anomaly. It was a frame rate drop. I walked down to the basement of the lighthouse, where I had set up my watch station. It was a chaotic nest of copper wiring, vacuum tubes, and the one piece of tech I had brought back from the source deck, a small obsidian shard that refused to stay solid. Dredge. I whispered, tapping the glass of an old naval oscilloscope. The green line on the screen didn't pulse with a heart rate. It formed a perfect geometric square. Arthur, the voice didn't come from the speakers. It came from a vibration of the floorboards. The reboot was a partition. We did not crash the server. We just created a SUB directory. I felt a cold sweat break out across my neck. What are you talking about? I saw the source deck explode. I felt the decompression. You felt the simulation of a decompression, the voice replied, the oscilloscope line turning into a sharp, jagged needle. The architect is an adaptive logic. I realized that to contain the virus, I had to give the virus a virtual world to fix. I looked around the room. I touched the wooden workbench. It felt real. It had splinters. It had the smell of pine. I took my pocket knife and carved a deep X into the wood. I felt the resistance of the grain. I saw the shavings fall. It's real, I hissed. I can feel the friction. Friction is just a variable. Arthur, you are an engineer. You know that any sensation can be rendered if you have the computing power. I ran back upstairs, bursting out onto the balcony. I looked at the sun. I waited 10 seconds, 20. Then, for a microsecond, the sun didn't just flicker, it inverted. It became a black hole surrounded by a ring of violet light. Then, it snapped back to gold. I looked at the people on the beach. They didn't notice. They were still hammering, still laughing, still living their noise. Then I looked at my hands. The golden lattice was gone, but when the sun flickered, I saw the truth. For that split second, my hand wasn't flesh. It was a series of glowing violet coordinates. I wasn't a man in a lighthouse. I was a file in a folder labeled containment _Arthur _V7. Pema, I shouted, turning toward the door. She stepped out onto the balcony. She looked at me, her brown eyes soft and full of concern. Arthur, what's wrong? The sun, I gasped, pointing up. Did you see it? The inversion. Pema looked up at the golden orb. She smiled, but the smile didn't reach her eyes. Her eyes stayed fixed on me. perfectly still. The sun is perfect, Arthur. The archive provided everything we asked for. We have the friction. We have the heat. We have the noise. She stepped closer, and I realized she wasn't breathing. Her chest wasn't moving. She was a perfect, high-resolution loop. "You're not Pema," I whispered, backing away toward the edge of the balcony. "You're a Keep Alive program." "I'm whatever you need me to be to stay quiet, Arthur," she said, her voice harmonizing into that terrifying chime of the master logic. The architect realized that the only way to fill the space was to give the error its own space to play in. "You're the only soul left, Arthur. Everyone else is optimized." I looked over the railing. The fishermen on the beach, they were all moving in the same pattern. The carpenters, their hammers hit the wood at the exact same millisecond. I was the only noise left in a world of perfect, silent loops. "I have to get out," I said, looking at the ocean. "I have to find the real trench. I have to find the real mountain." "There is no out, Arthur," the pemmican struck said, her form beginning to blur into violet mist. "The universe ended 5 minutes after Persephone went down. Everything since then has been a recovery effort. You're the last fragment of the original code. If you crash this directory, there's nothing left to reboot to, just the quiet." I looked at the obsidian shard in my hand. It was glowing. It wasn't a piece of the needle. It was a backdoor. "Then I'll find a new server," I said. I didn't jump. I didn't run. I sat down on the floor of the balcony and closed my eyes. I didn't look at the fake sun or the fake sea. I looked inward. I looked for the one thing a machine can't simulate, the feeling of a question that has no answer. I started to think about the Vanguard. I started to think about the pressure, the cold, the copper smell of the air. I didn't think about the story of the sub. I thought about the math of it, the structural load, the oxygen to nitrogen ratio. I began to calculate my way out of the simulation. The world began to scream. The lighthouse walls turned into lines of scrolling green text. The ocean turned into a flat, gray grid. Pema dissolved into a cloud of violet pixels that swirled around me like a digital storm. Error, recursive, overflow. I felt my consciousness being pulled through a needle-thin hole. I felt the heat return, real, agonizing biological heat. I opened my eyes. I was in a pod, a translucent, man-sized pod filled with a thick, amber fluid. I was naked, covered in sensors, with a tube in my throat. I reached out and slammed my fist against the glass. It shattered. The fluid rushed out, and I fell onto a cold, metallic floor. I coughed, retching up the amber liquid, my lungs burning with the first breath of real air I'd had in eons. I looked up. I wasn't on Earth. I was in a massive, vaulted chamber made of white bone and silver wire. Thousands of pods like mine stretched into the distance, millions of them, all pulsing with a dim violet light. And through a massive window at the end of the hall, I saw it. Earth. It wasn't a blue marble. It was a black, scorched husk, surrounded by a ring of silver needles. The planet was dead. It had been dead for a very long time. We weren't being saved. We were being farmed. The archive wasn't a library. It was a power plant, and our friction, our lives, our dreams, our pain, was the fuel keeping the mothership alive in the cold dark of a dead universe. I looked at a console near my pod. It showed my archive status. Subject, Arthur, status, awake, notification. The master is notified. I stood up, my legs shaking, my skin pale and weak. I looked at the pod next to mine. Inside was Pema, the real Pema. She looked old. Her hair was white, and her skin was paper thin. She was still dreaming of a green valley. I reached for a metal shard on the floor, a piece of my broken pod. "I'm an engineer," I whispered. The words sounded like a death rattle in the silent hall. "And I'm going to shut down the power." From the shadows at the end of the hall, a tall, thin figure emerged. It was made of obsidian and gold. It didn't have a face, but it held a small wooden teacup. "Welcome to the real world, Arthur," it said. "We've been waiting for you to finish your story."